We're on.
Hi, everybody, and welcome again to the Popular Music Books in Process series, PMBiP, a joint progress of IASPM US, the Journal of Popular Music Studies, and the POP Conference, now sponsored by the NYU Clive Davis Institute. I'm Carl Wilson, one of the series organizers, along with Eric Weisbard, Kim Mack. You can find our whole calendar on the IASPM website, and you can catch up on videos of past sessions, including last week's great session with Hanifa Birakib on Eric Weisbard's channel on YouTube, which we encourage you to share widely. Next week, April 13th, we're excited to have Regina Bradley present her new book, Chronicling Stankonia, The Rise of the Hip Hop South, in conversation with Imani Perry. But this week, of course, it's Chris Molanphy talking with Emily Lordi about his work in progress for the singles book series from Duke University Press on Old Town Road by Lil Nas X, which is expected in spring of next year. Quick bios of our presenters today. Chris Molanphy is a chart analyst and pop critic who writes about the intersection of culture and commerce in popular music. For Slate, he hosts the Hit Parade podcast and writes their Why Is This Song Number One series. His work has also appeared in Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, Vulture, NPR Music, and many others. Chris is also a frequent guest on NPR and on numerous podcasts such as the Slate Culture Gabfest. And Emily J. Lordi is, as of this week, congratulations, a full professor of English at Vanderbilt University, a writer at large at T Magazine, and the author of 3 books about African-American music literature and culture, most recently, The Meaning of Soul, Black Music and Resilience Since the 1960s, which you can see or discuss in the August 19th edition of our series on Eric's YouTube page. And Emily, along with Joshua Clover, also edits the new single series from Duke that's publishing Chris's book. Reminder that during their conversation, you can put your questions in the chat sidebar. And at the end, Kim Mack will use those to call on you to unmute and ask them in the Q&A. And of course, you can also use the chat for comments and for chat. And so now, Chris and Emily, with no further ado, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Carl. Emily, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, sure. I'll kick things off. Really happy to be here in conversation with Chris. Thanks to everybody as ever for organizing. I'm kind of here just to ask Chris some questions about his book in progress and to also introduce the singles series, of which his book on Old Town Road is one of our inaugural titles. So the singles series are a series of short books, somewhat modeled after the 33 1/3 books, that are co-edited by myself and Joshua Clover, who unfortunately can't be here today because he's teaching right now, and published by Duke University Press under the illustrious leadership of Ken Wissaker. And they are 30,000 words or so, 30,000 word meditations on a single song, a song with a sort of vibrant and significant life beyond its moment, beyond the particular record on which it appears. We're interested in the way these singles circulate, the kinds of cultural meanings and debates, that they inspire and accrue over time. And yeah, just their lives in their moment, what they mean to people who love them and hate them, as well as their afterlives in the years and even decades beyond. So we have about 5 or 6 titles currently lined up. The first of which I think will be published in the fall, is Joshua Clover's own book on Roadrunner by Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. We also have books forthcoming on Voodoo Child. I'm not going to tell you the authors, but it might be fun for you to imagine who's writing on Voodoo Child, for instance, Formation. We would love to have books also on a variety of different kinds of songs. So this is also me opening up a call. Those of you who are interested, we don't have a formal submission process currently. Oh, Eric, you're also doing a book. You're doing Hound Dog, right? Yes. Okay. So Eric's doing a book as well. We would also love to have books on, I don't know, a variety of things. Jolene, we'd like a book on Jolene. We'd like a book on a disco, I Will Survive, or, if people have ideas, do pitch us. Again, the submission process is fairly open currently and a little bit undefined, but what we want is just to hear from you. Tell us about a song that you can't stop thinking about and would like to devote 30,000 words and, I don't know, a few months to dealing with, and we can take it from there. I don't think that I have anything else that I really want to say about the series itself, except that, we began the series by approaching several, writers who we thought could but perhaps speak to particular sort of niches that we wanted to fill. And so one of those niches was the big song. And we thought, who better to invite to write about the big blockbuster chart-topping song than Chris Molanphy, one of the best pop music writers that I know, as well as probably one of the only people that I know who can make chart history really interesting. So we asked him to write about Lil Nas X's Old Town Road. And from there, I guess without further ado, I'll just turn it over to him.
Thank you so much, Emily. That is very fulsome praise, and I am super excited to be among the inaugural authors for this series. For years, I've had various ideas for 33 and the Third titles. I've never pitched, I've never written one of them. So the fact that there's a series about songs feels cosmically appropriate for me. So I am delighted to be a part of this series. When Emily and Joshua approached me last summer, in the teeth of the pandemic, not that we're out of it, I said to them, do you see this being a book about just the song, or can it be about more? And I'm going to go ahead and flatter, the person who introduced us tonight, Carl Wilson, who of course, wrote probably my favorite 33 and a third book, Let's Talk About Love, and used it as a jumping off point to discuss so much more than that Celine Dion album. And similarly, I saw Old Town Road as a jumping off point for everything having to do with popular music and the charts and how they've evolved over the decades.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. We're just getting a really staticky signal from your mic right now. It's really cutting in and out a bit. So I just wonder if there's anything you can try there.
I could try unplugging this mic. Switching to this, is that any better?
So far, a little better, yeah.
Let's do that. I've been having weird Wi-Fi issues all week, so thank you for that, Carl. Anyway, as I was saying, Carl is in part an inspiration for this book because of what he did with Let's Talk About Love in the 33 and a Third series. The fact that he, used it as a jumping off point for, a discussion of taste and, high and low, or supposed high and low culture. And similarly, I wanted to use the Old Town Road discussion as a way into the charts. Folks have been asking me for about a decade now, would I write a book about the charts? And the first thing I would say is, with what 36-hour day would I do that? And then I would say, well, I would need an angle for it. And when Emily presented me with the idea of doing a book about Old Town Road, it just seemed like the perfect entree for that. And I thought I would start by reading a bit of a chapter. What I've done with the book is I start off with a short bio of Lil Nas X and how he came to record Old Town Road. And then I basically go widescreen for several chapters talking about various aspects of genre, country, hip hop, the history of the charts themselves, the history of genre on the charts, the history of the remix. That chapter turned out to be more interesting than I thought it would be, and longer than I thought it would be, much to our chagrin, because we're going to have to cut it. Finally, winding up the whole book with a TikTok, no pun intended, of all the weeks that led up to Lil Nas X breaking that all-time record for, most weeks at #1 in the history of the Hot 100, 19 weeks. The bit I'll read here is sort of the preamble to the genre chapter, which is chapter 6. And here we go. In late 2014, Billboard made a quiet but pivotal decision about a song that was climbing their charts and about to top the Hot 100. They were not going to classify Mark Ronson and Bruno Mars's Uptown Funk as an R&B song or allow it to chart on their Hot R&B Hip Hop Songs chart. At the time, I found this decision bizarre. Uptown Funk is an unabashed top-to-bottom homage to turn of the 80s R&B, from Rick James to Zapp to the Gap Band. It's so indebted to that sound, the Gap Band's members made a legal claim against Ronson and Mars and won a belated writing credit. Speaking as a music critic, I thought Billboard not allowing Uptown Funk onto their R&B hip-hop chart was almost indefensible. Thinking like a chart analyst, however, I got why Billboard was making this category call, likely making this category call, even if it seemed presumptuous and a bit cynical. Basically, under the magazine's modern genre charts rules, given its enormous success as an emerging pop smash, Uptown Funk was likely to be the #1 R&B hip-hop track for an exceptionally long period. To be exact, although Billboard could not have fully foreseen this at the time, it would have sat on top for 19 weeks from December 2014 through April 2015, an all-time R&B chart record. This run by Funk would have preemptively beaten future record setter One Dance by Drake, an 18-week chart topper in 2016, and it would have beaten two pre-rock chart commanders that shared the 18-week record with Drake, Joe Liggins's 1945 hit The Honey Dripper and Louis Jordan's 1946 topper Choo Choo Chaboogie. Liggins and Jordan had their runs on top when this chart was called Race Records. The chart's lack of funk seemed even odder by early 2015, when the song, already a pop #1, also began breaking at Black radio. To be fair, the song's lead artist, the white Mark Ronson, was primarily a producer of R&B adjacent acts like Amy Winehouse. He was just breaking as a performer, but its nominal featured performer, and in the minds of most listeners, its de facto lead performer, the multiracial Bruno Mars, had made a couple of R&B chart appearances before, most recently as the credited singer of rapper B.O.B.'s Nothing on You, which reached the chart's top 5 in 2010. When I asked Billboard whether they would now allow Uptown Funk onto hot R&B hip-hop songs, their director of charts affirmed that they would not, saying their charts department still considered the song, quote, a pop hit that is crossing over to R&B radio. Again, thinking tactically, I could understand their reluctance to grandfather it in. Under Billboard's rules, if Uptown Funk were reclassified as R&B at that late date, it would have instantly and bizarrely debuted at #1 on the R&B hip-hop chart. In the end, by April of 2015, Uptown Funk peaked at #5 on the R&B hip-hop radio chart, with a bigger Black radio audience than such genre hits as Nicki Minaj and Beyonce's Feeling Myself and Drake's How About Now. Yet, Ronson and Mars's hit was never allowed onto hot R&B hip-hop songs. I shared this funk chart tidbit with readers of my Slate Why Is This Song #1 series in April 2019, the week Lil Nas X's Old Town Road took over the top of the Hot 100. This was a couple of weeks after Road had infamously been removed from Billboard's Hot Country Songs, a decision that generated quite a kerfuffle in the media, including in publications not normally concerned with the minutiae of how songs are assigned genres by the music business. Most reporters and commentators leapt to the conclusion that Road's removal was garden variety racism. To be sure, racial essentialism was at work in Billboard's decision. But I felt most observers were missing the real controversy, which was what genre charts actually measure in the digital era, and who gets to decide what goes on them. Whether or not Old Town Road was a country song, there should be a way for the country audience to collectively decide that, the same way R&B audiences clearly, organically decided Uptown Funk was an R&B song. The final irony, because of the same 2010s genre chart rules that led Billboard to yank Old Town Road from its Hot Country Songs chart, Lil Nas X's hit wound up spending nearly 5 months in 2019 atop hot R&B hip-hop songs, the chart that Billboard did allow it to appear on. Its 20 weeks on top gave Road the all-time R&B chart record, outlasting Drake, Joe Liggins, and Louis Jordan. So that's the lead in to the genre chapter. And then I go down the rabbit hole of sort of recounting the history of the R&B chart back when it was called Race Records, when it was bequeathed the name Rhythm and Blues by Atlantic Records co-founder Jerry Wexler. I talk about the history of the country chart and how Nashville has acted as a gatekeeper for what should be on that chart throughout its history. How, interestingly, in brief summary, the country chart came to be an all radio chart because eventually singles were not selling very well to anybody but jukebox operators in the world of country, and the country industry really liked it better that way when radio was ruling the roost. And that comes with its own set of thorny problems, which eventually bear fruit in the Lil Nas X controversy in 2019. So that's what that chapter's about. But it's just one piece of the story. Like I said, there's a whole chapter about internet and viral fame and the whole history of that. Obviously, TikTok gets a moment in the sun. The Yeehaw agenda and the Yeehaw challenge, which of course are a homage to the Black Cowboy and a challenge that involved TikTok users of all races putting on their best cowboy garb to the key moment in Lil Nas X's song. So there are a lot of paths to go down when discussing the history of this song.
Chris, can I ask you a question? It's going to be one of the kind of later questions on this list
Sure.
of questions that I have about genre, because it follows well, I think, from the passage that you just read. The question that I have is, do you think, so given your view that listeners ought to be able to decide what chart a song belongs on, do you think that the country base, say, or the country market would have decided of their own accord that Old Town Road was a country song? That's my first question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'll jump to the conclusion first and then explain what I mean. The conclusion I would give is, yes, they would have decided that it is a small to medium-sized country hit. And that is how it should be. And that is what it was. Looking just at the country airplay chart, Old Town Road wound up peaking at number 50 on the country airplay chart. And, that's after several country programmer directors really did give it the old college try and try it out on their listeners. And it took, but not entirely. Really, it was more of a conversation generator than the sort of record that was going to go into regular rotation alongside Luke Combs and the like. And that is fine. The problem, as I describe in this chapter, which I am not going to read the entirety of to you all today, is that in the tens, Billboard made what I have since called the single worst methodology change they've ever made in their history. They decided to turn all of their genre charts into mini Hot 100s. So essentially, the R&B chart, the Latin chart, the country chart, the rap chart, they are all the exact same set of data used for the Hot 100. Just all digital sales, all streams, all radio airplay, including any radio station that plays current music. So top 40 radio factors in, regardless of genre. And they cut it down to the songs that qualify, as far as Billboard is concerned, for that genre. Never mind the problem of Billboard deciding like a great god in the sky that Uptown Funk is only a pop record, not an R&B record, or that Old Town Road is not a country record. The real problem is this all or nothing data issue, where what is now called hot country songs is a chart that is basically a mini Hot 100 with tremendous amounts of pop crossover built into it. And by the way, that word is key. Why do we use the term crossover? What does crossover mean? Crossover is only useful, and it's a fraught term, but it's only useful when you're talking about how a song crosses back and forth between an all genre or mainstream audience versus a niche audience. That's what makes crossover useful. By Bowdlerizing, I would argue, and neutering their genre charts, Billboard has effectively made crossover impossible. We now don't really, at least on the main chart, Old Town Road was permitted onto the country airplay chart. If radio played it, Billboard allowed it. the kerfuffle that Billboard got into, the own goal that they wound up in, was that they allowed Old Town Road onto the main flagship Hot Country chart for 1 week at number 19, and then they yanked it. And they yanked it because basically the Nashville Industrial Complex, as I colloquially called it, decided collectively that they didn't think this was a country record. And it sucked either way. The optics either way were terrible. Either Billboard was going to leave that record on the flagship Hot Country Songs chart, which again is just a mini Hot 100, where you take all those records that they've decided are country and like an accordion, you shrink them down, and that's the country chart. They either left it on, in which case Old Town Road would have been the #1 country song in the country for months, or they do what they did, which is yanking it. And by the way, of course, the real problem is that they allowed it on for 1 week, then pulled it. I don't know that we would be having this conversation right now if it had never been allowed on at all. It would have been a much smaller tempest in a teapot if it had never been allowed on in the first place, before Billboard woke up and said, wait a minute, this record that got tagged on Spotify as a country record is not really a country record, or so we've been told. The example I like to give is, there are two examples I like to give from the 1980s. One example on the R&B chart is I Can't Go For That by Hall & Oates, which topped what was then called, I believe, Hot Soul Singles. It's changed names many times, in early 1982. And this is one of only 2 or 3 Hall & Oates records that have ever touched the R&B chart. Now, in that case, Billboard was not deciding, like a great God in the sky, that I Can't Go For That was a black enough record to put on the R&B chart. It was getting played by black radio. It was selling at a set of core stores that filtered into the R&B chart, such that there was data backing up the fact that this was being embraced on its own terms by an R&B centric audience. The other example I like to give, it's even more pertinent to the Lil Nas X discussion, is Lionel Richie's 1984 single Stuck on You from his album Can't Slow Down. If you ever heard that record, for all intents and purposes, that is a country record. Now, it charted R&B because Lionel is Lionel. It charted pop because Lionel was at the peak of his fame and popularity. But it also got to number 24 on the Hot Country Singles chart. And that is just about right. Is Stuck on You as big as Alabama was in the summer of 1984? No. Should it have been a top 5 country record? Probably not. But was it getting played enough on country radio in 1984 that it should have been a medium-sized country hit? Yes. Number 24 is a very credible peak for Lionel Richie carpetbagging, pardon the expression, in country music for one song. That's the way it should be. And similarly, if the charts were working in the 10s the way they worked in the 80s, Lil Nas X's Old Town Road probably would have peaked in the 50s or the 40s, and that would have been just fine. And the controversy never would have flared up the way it did.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Great answer. And just one more question about the genre issue, I guess, is just, well, it's a dual question. Do you consider it to be a country song? And given that he hasn't really recorded much, I guess, country, a term that now we have to think, obviously, very critically about since
Right.
then. How has that changed your sense, or has it changed your sense of Old Town Road itself?
I'll answer that question this way. When the controversy flared up a few weeks before the song went to number 1 in March of 2019, I actually had some sympathy for, Nashville Incorporated, in the sense that as good as Old Town Road is, and as country indebted as it is, I understand those who would argue it's not core to the format. That's legit. Like, one counter argument that Lil Nas X himself made, as well as several critics, was that, yes, it has trap drums, but so do other country records have trap inflected or even full-on trap drums. Electronic drums that, could sit just as comfortably in a hip hop track. And that's fine, but it's okay. In a way, this is a follow-on to the answer I just gave on the last question. It's fine if this is not at the center of the format, but it should be permitted to, ride as far as it can go, ride till it can't go no more, ha ha ha, up the country chart. And if it peaks in the 30s or the 40s, then fine. So is it a country record? Yes, it's a country record and several other things. I would call it a hip hop record. I'd hesitate to call it a rap record by the Drake definition, where Drake complained in 2015 that he won Best Rap Song for Hotline Bling, a song in which he sings and doesn't really rap. It's an all singing song. It's not really a dropping bars kind of record. It's a novelty record, sort of. It's a comedy record. It's clearly a pop record. And if you can call a genre internet, it's an internet record. But yeah, it should have been allowed on the country chart, and it should have been allowed to sink or swim on its own merits. And it never would have gotten to #1 under the old methodology. And again, that would have been fine.
Let me ask you a question about the medium, I guess, because one thing that I learned from your book that I hadn't known, others might know, is that Lil Nas X was like an internet genius, you know, like that he had his Twitter account and his, just like all of the different things that he was able to leverage in this moment to, I mean, not that he could have predicted his own just outstanding success, which as you would argue, I think is largely indebted to the controversy surrounding Billboard pulling the song from the chart, which actually, you know, worked to his great advantage in many ways. But it's just to say, you know, I just learned how savvy he was about the internet in ways that in some sense do kind of predict the way that he was able to like ride this moment. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. He wrote, Lil Nas X wrote Old Town Road to be viral. He wrote it to be funny. So those who call it a novelty record, you're not off the mark. It's not an insult. It's kind of a statement of fact. He wanted lines like "Ride till I can't no more" and "I got the horses in the back." One tidbit I uncovered in my research is that when he first posted it to SoundCloud, he posted it as, quote, "Old Town Road, parentheses, I got the horses in the back." And he subsequently gave interviews in which he said, "I knew people would love that line." And sure enough, when it broke on TikTok, the moment when everybody does the little jump and then they land in their cowboy gear is the "I got the horses in the back" line. That's the pivotal moment. So Lil Nas X just had this sixth sense for what would play in a viral context even before TikTok existed. He was a tweet decker. For those of you, I had to get up to speed on what tweet decking is myself. I had used the app TweetDeck just to post tweets for myself, but I didn't know what tweet decking was as a verb until I researched this book. It's basically the kind of interplay among tweeters such that they boost each other's tweets by, you know, riding Twitter you know, across multiple handles and, you know, getting things to build up virality. I'm not explaining it very well, but more or less that's what tweet decking is. He was already a tweet decker. He was a Nicki Minaj stan. He was part of the Barbs, the Nicki Minaj fan community. In fact, his first Twitter persona was Nas Mirage, spelled with an R-A-J at the end, intending to mimic the spelling of Minaj. It came out after Old Town Road was a smash. He was denying that he was a Nicki Minaj stan, and then finally he kind of, you know, before he came out as gay, he came out as a Nicki Minaj stan, which was kind of funny. And you know, he really was thinking about virality at every moment. And when he heard the sample by the Dutch teenager, Young Kyo, that's his handle. By the way, if you've ever wondered what that little quirky sound is at the beginning of the record, it kind of sounds like Kyo. That's the audio branding of Young Kyo, the creator of the beat. Young Kyo had adapted this Creative Commons licensed banjo, you know, instrumental by, wait for it, little 9 Inch Nails, aka Trent Reznor. He'd sped it up, thrown a trap beat behind it, not sped it up drastically, and he hadn't chopped it up very much. And as immediately when Lil Nas X hears this beat one day when he goes trolling for beats on YouTube, he says, not only does that sound like country, but oh, I can make this really funny. And he was looking for that kind of you know, infectiousness right from the jump. Not to jump too far ahead to the end of our conversation, but of course, what's ironic about the week when we're having this chat here on this forum is that Lil Nas X is now back at #1 on the Hot 100 with his new single Montero (parentheses Call Me by Your Name). And again, there's nothing country about Montero, but yet again, he sort of has decoded what will make a song go viral. And, you know, I'm about to write my piece for Why Is the Song #1 this week about Montero. And, you know, again, like if there's any commonality between Old Town Road and Montero, it's that its genre is internet. Its genre is, you know, internet virality. And that is, you know, Lil Nas X's special skill.
That's great. I love that idea of the genre of internet virality that he might have, you know, might be in the process of developing. Are there actually, let me ask you that. Is that like an innovation of his? Are there other people who you would say, whose genre you would say is internet virality?
I mean, there are other examples, as I talk about in the, you know, internet culture chapter of the book. I lead off that chapter with the story of Laffy Taffy by D4L. One fun coincidence is that D4L were raised in the same Atlanta housing projects, the Bankhead projects, that Lil Nas X himself was raised in. Yeah, I know you can't make this stuff up. Laffy Taffy was sort of the big hit of snap music of the aughts. And the reason it went to #1 was all about technology and virality. It was the hottest iTunes download of the holiday season of 2005. And it did all of its sales the morning after Christmas. Not the week leading up to Christmas, but basically all these teenagers unwrapped their first iPod on Christmas morning and then had iTunes gift cards to spend, and they all spent it on Laffy Taffy. And the reason they were savvy about Laffy Taffy was because, like most snap music, Laffy Taffy sounded great as a cell phone ringtone. And by the way, let's remember the iPhone hadn't been invented yet. The iPhone starts in 07. This is 05, 06. And those, you know, Motorola Razr type phones were, you know, coin of the realm then. And so you were looking for something as uncluttered as possible to use as your ringtone, something that would have instant, you know, recognition. And ringtones didn't count for the Hot 100, but it inspired hundreds of thousands of teenagers to buy Laffy Taffy, which sent it to #1 on the Hot 100 in early January of 2006 for just 1 week. And then it was over. So that's a precursor. I talk about Soulja Boy, you know, his song Crank That. That's a predecessor. I talk about the Harlem Shake, which goes to #1 the very week in 2013. Billboard adds YouTube data to the Hot 100, and dance crazes in general. I talk about Silento's Watch Me Whip, Watch Me Nay Nay. I talk about the Shmoney Dance by Bobby Shmurda, which broke, believe it or not, on Vine. Vine, which only lasted about 2 to 3 years, but is basically the beta test, if you will, of what became TikTok. So yeah, there have been hits that precede Old Town Road and have that kind of virality in their story. The difference is that Lil Nas X, and we can now say this, if we were having this conversation even 1 week ago, I wouldn't necessarily have been able to say this categorically, but with Montero debuting at #1 this week, I think we can say that no artist has figured out how to be viral the way Lil Nas X has. You could say that Drake, among like established artists, you know, has been very clever about the way he's decoded it. You know, the way he launched Hotline Bling with a video that invited you to turn it into a meme, or you know, the way he did Toosie Slide last spring and literally told you how to do a TikTok-friendly dance step in the lyrics of the record. So it's not as if there's been nobody who's figured out how to go viral before, but Lil Nas X as a Gen Xer born into the internet just seems to have this in an innate way in his blood, the way no artist has before, I would say.
Last two questions. I'm going to fold them together because I know there are a lot of other questions, but I want to make sure that these are on the table for you. Speaking of, you know, like tried and true country people, people who have, you know, certain things in their blood, you know, which is of course like a vexed concept, which I know, not that you were like speaking, you know, in like racially essentialist terms, but just that
right.
The person who one would look to, or who he looked to, right? Like funnily enough was Billy Ray Cyrus as like legitimating, and like in a funny way too. Like what I learned from your book is that the reason why he asked him was because, at least as he told him, he was the only country guy that he knew, and he knew him through watching Miley. on
Yeah, Hannah Montana.
watching him as like Miley's dad. So can you just talk a little bit about the Billy Ray Cyrus collaboration or joining of forces, how that affected the placement on the charts? And then the bigger question, finally, my last thing I want to ask you is just why you want to tell the story of this song as a story of the charts?
Thank you. These are all great questions. I appreciate it. The Billy Ray Cyrus thing, here's one thing I learned doing the research for this that I didn't know when I wrote multiple articles about this when it was a #1 hit in 2019. He put a wish into the universe, kind of like, you know, that Oprah popularized book, The Secret, way back in December 2018, the day after he dropped Old Town Road on SoundCloud and Twitter. He put a tweet out saying, all lowercase letters, somebody help me get Billy Ray Cyrus on this, please. And again, why Billy Ray Cyrus? Because he was the only country star he knew. Billy Ray Cyrus was not at the cutting edge of country in 2018. But don't forget that Billy Ray Cyrus, you know, his big moment was in 1992 with Achy Breaky Heart. Montero is born in 1999, Lil Nas X. So he's the perfect age to be a fan of Hannah Montana when that show is rampaging across the Disney Channel in 05, 06, 07. That's how he knows who Billy Ray Cyrus even is. So he puts that wish into the universe. And the way I portrayed it in previous writings I've done about Lil Nas X and Old Town Road, I thought that Billy Ray had jumped on the remix basically to kind of give a screw you to Nashville. It eventually became that, but because Lil Nas X had kind of put it in the universe early, even before the dust up with Billboard and the country chart happened, when Columbia Records was days away from signing Lil Nas X, one of their executives reached out to Billy Ray Cyrus and basically said, have you heard this record? And are you aware that this young man would love for you to be on his record? And Billy Ray has subsequently given multiple interviews where he talks about the day he crystal clear remembers sitting down with his cup of coffee next to his wife and his wife playing him the original mix of Old Town Road. And he says, wow, that's amazing. That's original. I would be happy to do that. And that very weekend, he goes and starts recording the remix, writing the new verse, you know, hat down, crosstown, living like a rock star, that verse that didn't exist previously. I didn't know that he worked with a Black collaborator on that verse. She shows up in the fully produced music video a month later. But then it's after he records the remix that the whole dust up happens with the country charts and Billboard. And then Billy Ray is kind of all in. You know, he's had his own run-ins with the Nashville industrial complex. He's had people saying, that line dance record, that Achy Breaky Heart, that's just a fad. That's not a real core country record. He'd faced his own battles with the Nashville establishment, and he was more than happy to kind of put a thumb in their eye and make it, you know, okay, well, what's not country about it now? And in terms of your question, it had a huge impact. To this day, we're now talking in early 2021, the single biggest week of streams for any song ever is the week that the Billy Ray Cyrus remix of Old Town Road drops. It garnered something like 143 million streams in a single week. That's both versions together, but the overwhelming bulk of that is the Billy Ray Cyrus version. Interestingly, Lil Nas X got the record to #1 the week before on his own. So the first week of Old Town Road on the charts, the first week that it's #1, it's just listed as Lil Nas X. Week 2 and thereafter are Lil Nas X featuring Billy Ray Cyrus. And it was kind of a combination of everything. It was the controversy. It was everybody kind of being on Lil Nas X's and Billy Ray's side in this perceived, you know, David versus Goliath story. That made everybody want to consume the record. The streaming era matters because to consume the record is to boost it on the charts. You don't necessarily even have to pay $1.29 to buy it. You can just listen to it on Spotify. That's going to help its data on the charts. That explains why it garnered 143 million streams in a week. And I have long argued that Billy Ray took an already solid record and improved it. His verse is excellent. I mean, it's got a cadence and a catchiness to it that just kind of kicks it up a notch. There's a reason why that's the version that became the radio hit. So, and then what was the other question? Like why I wanted to write the book?
Yeah, I guess why did you want to tell the story of this song as a story of the charts? Aside from the fact that obviously we asked you to write about the song, you said
Yes.
You're a chart analyst. Like, what's the deeper purpose there? What does it allow you to reveal about the song or American culture by studying it in this way, through this lens?
You know, I go on radio shows to talk about the charts all the time, or podcasts, and I'm often asked, it's funny how often this question comes up, and everybody acts like they're the first ones asking it. They'll ask, do the charts still matter? And I often say, look, caveat emptor, I'm biased. I've been following the charts for 35 years, but yes, I think they matter. And if you don't believe me, look at the way the artists obsess over them, the way, DJ Khaled and Nicki Minaj will fight over whether or not their album was #1, the way BTS fans, the fan army, the ARMY, have, gone great lengths to get BTS a US #1 hit. So yes, these charts still matter as a barometer of popular success. And the thing about Old Town Road is it's such a rich, these words don't go together, but a rich prism through which to view the history of the charts and everything that has changed about the charts over 60 years. At one point, I talk about why Ray Charles's Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music didn't touch the country chart. It was on the R&B chart, it was on the pop chart, didn't touch country at all. The ways in which the charts have evolved and expanded their definition of what a hit even is. There are a few records that tell that story well. When I did a ton of press 2 Christmases ago, when Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You finally went to #1, literally 25 years after it was recorded, that was a great prism to talk about. Okay, let me explain why this happened, because you have to understand the mechanics of the chart to understand why it took this record 25 years, why streaming is a factor, why Hot 100 rules are a factor, why, the allowance for old songs to appear on the chart again is a factor. So All I Want for Christmas Is You is one of those records that allows you to sort of view the prism of evolution in popular music and the charts. And Old Town Road is another one. It's just an excellent, viewfinder for that entire line of argument.
Awesome. I'm happy to turn it over to other people's questions. So I think Kim was gonna kind of deliver those or call on people.
Thank you.
All right, so we have questions. So Richard Worth put a comment in. I don't know if you want to turn that into a question, perhaps?
Yeah. Okay. I'm coming at this as a musician and from a music analysis. This track stands out a million miles because it's a field holler. And I've actually made a YouTube video, the only time I've ever made a YouTube video. I don't know if you're familiar with John and Alan Lomax. So a famous recording from the Parchment, Mississippi prison farm of Tangle Eyes Blues, right? Now, Tangle Eyes Blues happened to be in the same key as Lil Nas X's Blues, as I call it. So I took the 9 Inch Nails track, pitched it up a semitone, and I just laid the Tangle Eye Blues over the top without doing anything else. And it makes this beautiful piece of music.
Interesting.
It's got a rock chord progression, a southern rock chord progression. And this pitched me into a whole thing to find out more about country. I mean, I knew about Jimmy Rogers and going back to the hillbilly days. I found that there was God's Country was a hit in the country charts around about this time. Blake Shelton. And that is another kind of southern rock chord progression, Aeolian minor, if you want to know, okay? Mm-hmm. All the other country I looked at that time didn't sound like country to me. It had 808 beats, and you're right, I looked at stuff like Florida Georgia Line, and it seemed incredible that if you heard that with that, that you could, so anyway, so my side of coming from this is that the music itself is extremely it's just totally different in the way that Pharrell Williams' Happy was totally different. It's retro. It seems to be retro, only when you go back, you can't actually find anything quite like it. So it's not really retro, but it appears to be retro. And I couldn't help but feel this big comparison with Pharrell Williams' Happy in terms of something that's semi-retro, very different from anything else. I mean, I know there's a bit of auto-tune, but let's face it, hardly there. And just completely different. Did that strike you at all about the music itself?
You know, the part that I'm keying into at the very end of your comment is the comparison to Happy, which I did write about for Why Is the Song Number One when it was a #1 hit in 2014. And, you know, effectively, Pharrell was adapting gospel in that record. Like, it was like a secular gospel record. And the way it was structured, it was a very particular kind of R&B. And I like your point that it's retro without having a specific antecedent, because I definitely hear that. The other thing that intrigues me about what you're saying is the idea that the chords are Southern rock chords, which of course makes total sense given the direction that country music itself has gone in the last 10 to 20 years, really 30. I mean, if you go back to when, you know, the Eagles sort of got sucked into country around the 90s, like they were already country in the 70s. Hotel California actually charted on the country chart, the country album chart in 77, but most of their albums didn't. But then by the 90s, you had that, you know, record of country artists covering the Eagles called Common Thread. And basically Southern rock in the persona of everybody from Eric Church to, I don't know, Kenny Chesney, it's all gotten absorbed into the sound of regular day-to-day country music, such that the distinction that would keep, for example, an example I like to bring up a lot, Creedence Clearwater Revival, off the country charts 50 years ago, right? None of those records, Proud Mary, Green River, none of them charted country, because that's what rock music sounded like. Mind you, 20 years later, Fantasy Records then went back and tried to promote Creedence's material as country music. So it's always evolving. And the idea that this song with rock chords could now read as country very easily makes total sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, actually, someone mentioned Jolene. Jolene, if it wasn't if it didn't have twang on it, that would be a psychedelic folk song from a band like Fairport Convention. If you listen to the beginning of it, what I discovered to me is that country very much reflects whatever's going on in the pop music of its period, when it's smooth, when it was the smooth Nashville sound that was very close to all, you know, all the R&B and soul of that time. So constantly you find that it's just reflecting what's happening at the moment. And that's again why this was rather different and sounded like country from a while back to me. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really enlightening. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. Ian Balfour has a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Hi, Ian.
Hi. I was wondering, I'd like to get your sense of how the videos of the song played into the reception of it. Like there's the factor of the trope of the black cowboy from Blazing Saddles, or if you remember Lawrence Fishburne on Pee-wee's Playhouse as Cowboy Curtis.
Good point.
That great persona. Could you just talk about the videos and the reception of the song?
Well, okay, so effectively there were two official videos for Old Town Road. One low budget, and thrown together by Lil Nas X himself, and the other high budget and slick and glossy and, you know, bankrolled by Columbia after he had signed a major label deal and after Billy Ray Cyrus had jumped on the record. What's interesting about the first one is it's just a compilation of footage from the game Red Dead Redemption 2, which plays a part in the black cowboy archetype. The protagonist of Red Dead Redemption 2 is not a black cowboy. However, the plot of the game, such as it is, has a lot to do with defeating Ku Klux Klan members, embracing black figures in the Old West and making them sort of part of the gang. So for its time, Red Dead Redemption 2 was trying to sort of bring the black presence into the Old West. This cross-pollinates with the Yeehaw agenda, which, by the way, is, like so many parts of this story, kind of an accident. A Twitter user who was commenting on a set of photographs that the R&B singer Ciara was putting on the cover of a magazine in cowboy gear. All she did was tweet appreciatively, "The Yeehaw agenda is in full effect." And people kind of jumped on that and turned it into a hashtag. She never really meant for it to go as viral as it did, but she coined the term. And that eventually led to the Yeehaw challenge. So that first video is kind of thrown into the mix in December of 2018 in the midst of all of this Yeehaw agenda, Yeehaw challenge. 2 months after Red Dead Redemption drops, it's a huge hit. It's basically one of the biggest opening video games of all time, second only to one of the chapters of the Grand Theft Auto series. So there's a lot of this cowboy and black cowboy iconography working its way around. And then Lil Nas X doesn't even try to shoot himself for a video. He just compiles a bunch of cutscene footage from Red Dead Redemption, and that's his video. The second version of the video, which comes out in May of 2019, when the song is already #1 and it gives the song yet another boost of virality, basically tries to make the argument over the song text rather than subtext. Lil Nas X is in the Old West with Billy Ray Cyrus. He ducks into a time portal and gets dropped into 2019. He time travels from 1889 to 2019 in his cowboy gear. And the whole plot of it is how he mystifies but then charms both a black crowd on the street that he lands on, and then a white crowd at a bingo hall who are decked out in Western gear. And basically saying this record is for all of these audiences. And it doesn't hurt that when you get to the bingo hall part of the production, Billy Ray Cyrus has gone through the time portal too, and he's with Lil Nas X, and he is sort of serving, and this is quite deliberate on the video's part, he's serving as an ambassador to country for Lil Nas X. So when Lil Nas X walks into the bingo hall and everybody in the bingo hall kind of snaps around and turns and looks at him, the fact that Billy Ray Cyrus is with him is kind of like his passport into that world, and pretty soon they're all line dancing to Old Town Road. So both of them are fascinating in terms of iconography, intersectionalism, race, to put it straightforwardly. And they both play a part in what made this song so utterly viral for that long period that it was #1.
That's great, thanks.
You got it.
So Jennifer, Lena, and Eric have questions that are kind of close. So I wonder if maybe they can ask them one after the other, and then Chris can answer.
Sure.
Yeah, we decided to tether. We're ganging up. First of all, it's such a pleasure to hear you talk, Chris. I'm so excited about this book, and congratulations to Joshua and Emily for the series. I'm already considering my pitch. So unsurprisingly, I'm delighted that you chose to read from the genre chapter. I've spent so much of my life thinking and writing about this. And my question was, forgive me while I read it, but I do better when I'm prepared. To my view, lived genre, that is how folks walking around describe the landscape of music, our emic categorization of music, and industry genre, whether that's shelving classification or any of the other ways that it gets labeled by commerce, these have always existed in tension. So I'm wondering if the seriously awful decision of Billboard when they recalibrated their charts gives us insight into that history and a chance to advocate for lived genres and the wisdom of the people. To put it bluntly, why were we arguing about race and the expression of the single song rather than race and the expression of the categories themselves? And then I'll throw to Eric.
My question was kind of just snarkier, which was sort of like how at the, when we're having all these kind of like data Jada sort of battles over representation of gender and race in country music, and a sort of political battle of representation, how using virality to circumvent genre, basically doing a kind of culture jamming or negation rather than holding up a picket sign and say, include me in your ranks, is sort of part of the genre strategy here. forget asking to be included. I'll just wink and I'll be in there anyway.
Right. Well, and last thing first, don't forget that the whole reason Billboard got into this dust up in the first place is because without paying enough attention to this unsigned artist who had posted his song to Spotify and tagged it as country, they allowed it on the country chart for 1 week, not paying enough attention. And then they had to yank it when they realized, oh, wait a minute, it's this thing with trap drums. And, you know, go ahead and make your nefarious plots about, oh, and he's black, you know, not that that should have negated him, but who knows. You both raise interesting points. I mean, Jen's point about lived genre is kind of the argument I'm making about, you know, the boundaries of genre such as they are. How do we define them? I mean, one thing that happened when the dust up with the country chart, you know, went down in March and April was that every commentator, and I was a little cynical about some of these commentators, people, especially outside of country music, were casting aspersions and saying, why do we even have genre? And I'm of the opinion that genre still has a purpose, that subcultures exist, and it's useful to track what those subcultures are consuming. But it has to be a subculture, to your point, Jen, that is lived and is, you know, fairly organic. And there's never been a perfect means to do that. You know, Billboard has struggled, particularly on the R&B chart, to define what is a credible cohort of Black-owned record stores, Black radio, etc. But they had a pretty good formula for about 40 years that only started to come apart, as I talk about in the book and have talked about in several of my articles over the years, in the digital era, when everybody basically piled into the same 3 or 4 sites to do all their consumption. Basically, if you're buying a track, you're probably buying it at iTunes. If you're watching a video, you're watching it on YouTube. And if you're streaming a song, you're streaming it on either Spotify or Apple Music. There's not a country iTunes or a Black Spotify. There is not a discrete space, at least as the apps define them, that you can break it down and say, oh, okay, let's just track the consumption in this app. You know, the argument I made, you know, this book relies heavily, and you know, Emily will remember this because, you know, we talked a lot about this article years ago. I did an article for Pitchfork in 2014 called I Know You Got Soul, which was about the checkered history of the R&B chart and how Billboard kind of Bowdlerized it in the 10s when they put all this digital data in. And I felt like by writing that article, I had to challenge myself to say, okay, smart guy, what would you do instead? And I admitted that Billboard, to be fair to them, are in a pickle not of their making. Because again, to repeat what I said a minute ago, the fact that everybody piles into the same 3 or 4 sites to do all their consumption makes it much harder than it did in the days where you could say, okay, this is a record store that caters to a primarily R&B consuming and or Black clientele. Those are the record stores we're going to include in this chart. This is the radio station we're going to include in this chart. Mind you, Black radio still exists. The only reason Billboard now includes top 40 and all, you know, adult contemporary, all currents radio on its genre charts is because they're now trying to compare apples to apples. They figure if we're going to include all genres by, you know, digital consumption, we have to include all genres by radio. I would quibble with that, but that's their rationale. My reply to that challenge is that there's got to be a way to identify without racially profiling anybody or without, you know, capturing IP addresses, a set of super users of a particular genre, whether it's users who overwhelmingly consume country or users who overwhelmingly consume R&B and hip hop, and then putting those folks in a pool, much like the folks who would organically go to a Black record store 30 years ago and saying, okay, what are these people consuming? And by the way, that allows for crossover, because then if they decide this Lord record feels like one that, you know, we want to consume in quantity, okay, maybe the Lord record is allowed onto the R&B chart, but it's a Lord record. It's not going to go to number 1. It's going to go to number 18, and that's fine. You know, like it's a hit that is consumed this much by the R&B loving audience and this much by the pop audience. Then you get your crossover back. I feel like, I mean, what have we been reading about Spotify for the last 5 to 10 years? That they have a remarkable amount of granular data about what we all consume. We've all done it. Every December, they give us that opportunity to say, here were my 5 most played, artists and 5 most played, songs of 2020. Enjoy, y'all, putting it on my Facebook page. Okay, if they've got that data, if they know that I, Chris Molanphy, consumed a lot of yacht rock in 2020, which, by the way, I did, because I did a yacht rock episode of Hit and overwhelmingly my top 5 was yacht rock. If you know that, then you know something about the common genres I use. Stick me in a bucket with other people in that genre, and let us be the cohort that decides the consumption for that chart. Then you've got something credible, and then it's more organic because you're letting the user drive the consumption pattern, if that makes any sense. I don't know. Did I answer both your questions? That's my best estimate.
I mean, from my perspective, did I keep my mute on? I can't remember.
No, I can hear you.
From my perspective, Lil Nas X circumvents all that well-meaning crap because he just gets over. And so my question was more about how what you're calling novelty, and I would call negation, sort of operates to kind of cut the line.
Right. And I mean, well, he cut the line in tagging his song Country to begin with, and he cuts the line by using internet virality as his means for, world domination, let's say, for lack of a better term. Lil Nas X is the exhibit A in everybody's argument over whether genre has meaning anymore. And that's been a theme in everything I've written for Why Is This Song Number One for the last few years. What genre is Billie Eilish? She's got trap drums all over her stuff, and many of the artists she's most inspired by are hip hop artists. Yet Billboard puts her on the alternative rock chart, not the R&B chart. So it's a provocative question. If you can tell I'm flailing, it's because I'm not sure there's a good answer to it.
It's cool.
Oh, you asked if you addressed mine, and I'll just say, yeah, I think, I really appreciated your answer very much. I think maybe it was lost in translation a little bit, what I was driving at, and maybe lost in the comments as well. At no point did I make an argument about ending genre. Rather, I was pointing out I was pointing out the tensions between these two things. And right. I'm surprised to hear you say, Chris, that you felt like they did a good job, up until 40 years ago. It seems to me like this classification by industry, whether it's record labels or Billboard or any of the other kind of folks that make money off of the popularity of music, that is an exercise of power, and specifically of racial and class power. And it finds its most powerful instrument in getting us to argue about whether songs fit into one genre or another. And so my question was really about, why wasn't this an awakening moment where we said, this is what power does to creativity. This is how it tries to distract us from other things that we might be concerned with, and refocuses us on whether classification has operated as it should, or what our alternative theories of classification are. And I think that's fascinating because we get lost in that for months as a time as a culture. And so that was really more the spirit of where my question was heading.
Gotcha.
Thank you for letting me clarify.
No, thank you for clarifying. The most, I would say, small c conservative thing I said when I made my original argument when Old Town Road went to number 1 in 2019 was that I still saw the value in genre, and that genre is still useful as long as it evolves, and it's always evolved. Again, I point to the Creedence Clearwater Revival example. That wasn't country music in 1969-70. It's now considered adjacent to country music today. The Eagles, various forms of R&B. And as long as genre is a living genre, you use the phrase, how genres are lived. I'm using it in the, ing ending term, but it's as long as genres are living genres, I still see them as useful. And also I leaned a little bit on Eric's book, Top 40 Democracy, in the distinction he made between genre and format. And formats are how radio organizes itself, and they organize themselves that way, I mean, to satisfy advertisers, certainly, but also because there's expectation setting with the audience. This is what you're going to hear on this station. And how much of that is a top-down enforced rubric by the industry? Some of that, without question. And there's no question that racial essentialism is built into that, no question. But how much of that is also the audience, the bottom-up expectations of the audience? And what's been kind of fun about the last 20 years, the digital era on the charts, as I call it, first with iTunes, then with Spotify, is that everything's gone bottom up. Things always break in a viral context, in an online context, YouTube, iTunes, etc. Look at the Laffy Taffy example I was giving about 20 minutes ago. Before radio catches on, radio is now following the consumer's lead in a way they never did 25, 30, 40 years ago. Radio used to dictate this is a hit. Now radio goes, I guess we should play Old Town Road. It looks like a hit. Thank you.
Okay. Carl, you have 2 questions. Can you pick one maybe?
Yeah.
We'll
yeah, I didn't mean to have 2 questions. But actually I'm gonna adapt my initial question to kind of come into the conversation we're already having a little more relevantly. Originally, I was just gonna ask you about the kind of what felt, at least as Anne pointed out, maybe to people who weren't as embedded in the same networks as Lil Nas X, like a kind of flailing around period in between Old Town Road and Montero. But more, I'd like to say, given the conversation that we've had, where the story has gone with Montero in terms of the kind of what he's learned in terms of his genre interventions and the statements that he's making about what kind of artist he is. And so maybe you can incorporate a little bit about that in between period there, but also let's just talk about Montero in the terms of the conversation we've been having.
Well, okay, so I have a bunch of writing ahead of me because not only am I going to be writing about Montero this week for Why's the Song #1, but as Emily knows, I still have to write some kind of epilogue and or conclusion of the book. I turned in the book last week with everything but the conclusion written, the legacy written. And I would like to say that was prescience on my part. It was mostly because I was 2 days past the promised deadline and I did not want to hold up Joshua and Emily any further. And so I said, you know what? Take what I've got. It's too long already. This won't surprise any of you. So I have a, to Carl's question, I have to determine the legacy of Lil Nas X. And there's a part of me that's grateful. This book was originally going to get written last fall and finished last fall. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily a great thing that I dragged it out as long as I did, but if there's a silver lining to that, it's that now I get to see what happens with Montero, and that becomes part of the epilogue to the story. I agree with you, Carl, that there was a bunch of flailing about. I mean, one point I made to several people is, as recently as 2020, was that you can't call Lil Nas X a one-hit wonder because Panini did well enough on the charts that, his follow-up single, which memorably borrows the melody of In Bloom by Nirvana, that record did well enough that he doesn't qualify as a one-hit wonder. But of course, prior to this, he was overwhelmingly known for Old Town Road. And, one of the cynical questions that got asked about Lil Nas X is, everybody raised their pitchforks, complaining about the fact that it was ejected from the country chart. This guy doesn't even seem to want to be a country artist. I don't think that should matter, but I will say that the sort of several different directions he veered in during the rest of 2019 and all of 2020 did kind of beg the question of, well, what kind of artist does he want to be? And what I like about the Montero story is that it kind of answers it. He doesn't have a genre as we previously defined it. His genre is pop, if it's anything, and it's a very small c Catholic definition of pop. It has embedded trap and hip hop elements. It has, pure pop elements to it. It has club music baked into it. We haven't even talked about one of the key beats in the story, which is Lil Nas X or Montero Lamar Hill coming out of the closet the last day of Pride Month 2019, which was a huge deal and a fascinating beat in the story of, artists coming in and out of the closet and, having chart success. I've written about that extensively. I wrote a piece about Adam Lambert a full decade ago about, when he felt comfortable coming out, when he competed on American Idol, and then when he scored a #1 album. Montero clearly, makes good on the, okay, I am being fully myself now, or at least, a, LGBTQ forward version of myself. So Montero kind of answers the question of the last 2 years of flailing, I think, was that he's in the process of discovering himself as an artist and defining his own lane. And I will say that in terms of the industry, that's always perilous, because when you don't have a lane, to go back to the thing we were just discussing with Jen and Eric a second ago, what's useful about genre is that you can always fall back on genre or on format when the pop audience abandons you. So if Montero, if Lil Nas X does not have a core format, it means he's got to hit it out of the park every time with the mass appeal pop audience, which is tough. He's increased the degree of difficulty for himself, but good on him. And I wonder whether his seemingly innate ability to make things go viral, at least through this single, will serve him in good stead. He will be, if I may invoke this, a Madonna-like figure in that way. At least, Madonna's first 15, 20 years, where she just seemed to know, now's the moment where people are ready for a song about voguing. Now's the moment when people are ready for me to do electronica. Now's the moment when, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now's the moment when I can do the stately ballad versus the dance pop stuff I was doing 5 minutes ago. Some artists just have a sixth sense for that. And maybe he's only 21 years old. Maybe Montero has that sixth sense.
Anne, do you have a question?
Hi, everyone.
And
Yeah, I'm cooking again, so sorry, I'm moving
quite
around
all
the
right.
kitchen. Chris, this is great, and I also can't wait to read the book and see how you put all the elements together. I have a bunch of comments and questions as usual, but one question I asked in the chat, I'm going to just sort of like ask two at once, I guess. One was, this is sort of more rhetorical, that's why I don't expect you to have an answer necessarily, but when critics like us try to trace the kind of origin points or lineages in a song like Old Town Road, I think sometimes we really misread the transmissions, and the fact that Lil Nas X sourced the 9 Inch Nails sample through another person's use and refashioning of it seems like we need a new language to talk about these lineages. Like, it's not, Griot's lipstick traces maybe is one way, but I wonder if you've thought about that, because I feel like that's a huge part of what's happening with TikTok and other social media platforms now, which is, it's just these the idea of an influence on someone and an artist is so different. I saw someone else commenting, Eric commenting on Montero deploying rock tropes in the current video, but I don't know. Or are they RuPaul Drag Race tropes? There's. I feel like we need a different way to talk about influences, and so that's more of a comment than a question. My other question, unposted, is: have you ever thought about doo-wop and the moment of doo-wop in connection to what's happening with songs, with viral songs today? I feel like doo-wop was a similar bridge moment in popular music history, similarly novelty song oriented, similarly incredibly innovative musically, and impossible to define. So I just wondered if you ever thought about that.
I haven't until now. That's an excellent analogy. The most I've thought about doo-wop in the last month and a half is my most recent episode of Hit Parade was about Sam Cooke, inspired by One Night in Miami, the Regina King film. And, when I went deep reading the Peter Guralnick book, the biography he did of Sam Cooke, and tracking the through line from his gospel career, where he was a superstar in gospel before he was a superstar in pop and R&B. The bones of doo-wop that reside in gospel, that was sort of fascinating to me. The way doo-wop kind of rides, I may be restating your point here, but it rides above genre. You know, I've met people who say, you know, folks who like oldies radio and say my favorite type of music is doo-wop. And I'm not sure anyone would call doo-wop a genre. I'm not sure I've ever seen a doo-wop, you know, title card in a record store. But doo-wop kind of straddles several different things, doesn't it? So yeah, I'm thinking out loud here because this is literally the first time I've thought about this in the Lil Nas X context, but it's an interesting analogy you're making.
Okay, and so Ken Wissaker, I don't know, do you have a question? I couldn't quite tell if you wanted to ask one.
No, I'm good.
You're good? Okay.
Hey, Ken.
All right. Okay, so thank you so much. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you to Chris and Emily. Please join us next week when Regina Bradley will be in conversation with Imani Perry about Regina's new book, Chronicling Stankonia, The Rise of the Hip Hop South. We hope to see you next week.